Hi, it got quiet all of a sudden, so I think that's like my cue to start. I know many of you all already. I'm so grateful to you all for coming. My name, if you don't know me, and if we haven't had the chance to say hello yet, my name is Paula Matthusen, and it has been my delight and pleasure and privilege to be the sleeve visiting professor for music, for the music department this semester at the University at Buffalo. I'd like to begin by thanking the chair of the music department, Eric Hubner, and the support staff of the music department, in particular Chris Jacobs and Philip Rehard, for making today possible. Many thanks are due to the graduate students of the music department as well for their engaging discussions and creativity throughout the semester. In particular, I'd like to thank Thomas Little, who in his capacities as composer, graduate student, and teaching assistant has been indelibly helpful and kind. And I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions of Tiffany Skidmore, Jamie Curry, Jonathan Golub, and Court Lippy of Media Studies, who have lent, if not literal props, some much needed levity during my time here. A great acknowledgement is also due to the SPLICE Ensemble, Keith Kirchhoff, Adam Vidixis, and Sam Wells, for coming from afar to be here today. Also to Jennifer Beattie, who literally lends her voice as part of today's proceedings. I owe a debt of gratitude to the National Park Service and Mammoth Cave, in particular Rick Toomey and Bryce Leach, for their support of much of the work you will learn of today. Another thank you to Andrew Sear of Metropolis Ensemble and Singularity Saxophone Quartet, who are watching from afar and will be here next week for a project I will also discuss. It is not coincidental that much of my talk begins with gratitude, for the projects which I speak of today are large in their nature, in terms of time, space, and scope, and as a result have many hands upon them. It was in relationship to preparing for this talk that I realized I had a reluctance to discuss the generation of specific pieces, as I developed an innate fear of closing them off, marking them as finished. Their potentialities well circumscribed within the bounds of an opening curtain and final applause. It is for this reason that I began to find some solace in resonating and riffing on the ideas of assemblage by Anna Lohenhauptsing in Mushroom at the End of the World. The concept of assemblage is helpful. Ecologists turn to assemblages to get around the sometimes fixed and bounded connotations of ecological community. The question of how the varied species in a species assemblage influence each other, if at all, is never settled. Some thwart or eat each others work together to make life possible. Still others just happen to find themselves in the same place. Assemblages are open-ended gatherings. They allow us to ask about communal effects without assuming them. They show us potential histories in the making. The concept of assemblage has many useful advantages in the projects I wish to discuss today, in that they provide a shifting set of circumstances that are engaged in intersecting timescales involving human and non-human. It is not incompatible, these ideas related to indeterminacy, which Tsing discusses in relationship to the Matsutake mushroom, as well as Cage's own compositional outlooks and mycological forays. Tsing's work has also been influential on poet and essayist Ross Gay's most recent and beautiful work, Inciting Joy. What I find so moving about this collection is the way in which it invites the mess, undoing, unfixing, acknowledging complexity, and how we are entangled. Joy is bound up with sorrow. They are not isolated. They need each other to exist. In an interview with Alexis Williams on It's Been a Minute, Gay states that joy comes from our practice of entanglement. To become entangled with one another, we cross an imagined threshold between us. As such, the work with the projects I discussed today, I wish not to highlight one specific feature of things, but rather to play with a collection of small episodes, which intertwine upon each other, to show they are porous with one another, and to point to larger narratives, which would be impossible to detail in 1 hour, and instead to allow for simultaneous resonance and intersection. In other words, I hope to practice entanglements, noting that practice is not perfection. It is one moment and a series of shared engagements with many actors. For this reason, I call today's talk Practicing Entanglements, the Cave, the Tape, the Spark, and Assemblage in 10 parts. So, okay, I know that sounds like a lot, and I swear to you, I just say this out as a general map so you know where you are, so you don't have any anxieties about, like, we're gonna be here for 16 hours. It's only 15, really. But in this case, there are 3 large parts. And in total, they're going to have 10 small sections in them. And those are lettered A through J, so you can keep track of where we are. All right. But so now that our introduction is done, we're just gonna go ahead and jump into this section 1, the cave.
How we make the music as well.
The research project led by Matthusen brings in musicians from across the nation to experiment and record how different sounds interact with the cave walls. The ensemble includes drums, trumpets, a harmonium, and an opera singer.
I think it's different factors. It's the size of the rooms, it's the passages that surround us. You know, in some areas you may be in one passage, but just below you, under a thin layer of rock, there's another passage, and that allows that reverberation of sound.
The group treks miles into the dark, carrying their instruments through the twists and turns of our nation's longest cave system.
I had to practice my part and be ready to play, but also all of this extra preparation, which is really fun because, you know, I enjoy being outdoors and hiking and things like that, and all of a sudden it's like I need to combine that, sort of backpacking skills with, you know, your musical skills.
But experience and thrills aside, how will they use the research? Well,
That's the big question.
Dr. Matthusen says some of the recordings will be for personal collections, but they'll also be used for future musical inspiration.
Part of what's fun about this is to think about the sociality of music making and how that's something that's both in the moment but extends far into the past and into the future as well.
If you want to hear the musicians perform live, you can catch them Thursday evening at 7 p.m. in the Mammoth Cave Amphitheater. Morgan, back to you.
A guide. When people ask me about the cave project, meaning Mammoth Cave, I often ask them how much time they have. I first visited Mammoth Cave in 2013, having been led there by a friend. I learned much from the guides there and was immediately impressed with its layers upon layers of history, the legacy of performance there, and of course, the sounds in the cave, natural, acoustic, human-made, and imagined. Throughout the course of this work, I have met and worked with a number of wonderful guides, and one whom I wish to introduce you to now is Jerry Bransford, a guide whom I had the good fortune to take tours with as well as interview in spring 2022. Jerry is generous with his knowledge and his sense of mission. Generations of his family worked as cave guides, extending back into the time period when some of the most famous guides, such as Stephen Bishop, Nick Bransford, and Matt Bransford, from whom Jerry descends, worked under the conditions of slavery. Jerry Bransford's work keeps the legacy of the Bransfords alive and crucially also located in the cave. The impact of this is hugely significant. The Bransfords and their colleagues and relatives were excluded when Mammoth Cave became a national park in 1941. Jerry Bransford, Matt's great-great-grandson, was the first Bransford to return in 2004. Jerry Bransford organized the monument for the Bransfords at Mammoth Cave that just opened recently in October. One of the places that Jerry Bransford likes to visit in tours is Cleveland's Cabinet, a place with an extraordinary resonance. Singing in it is powerful, and Jerry does so. In a tourist video, he sings, "Have You Got Religion?" and it melds with that resonance. I asked him about this song, as he said.
Well, actually, Cleveland's Cabinet is one of the places I really enjoy because I know that 3 or 4 generations of my ancestors would stop there as an entertainment to sing from people. They would sing old Negro spirituals, and I'm thinking that's one of them, and then others. So it's just a great place. The sound is great right there, and I feel sort of charged when we stop right there with people because I stand in that circle where I'm fairly sure that my great-great-grandfather would have stood back in 1857. So I just try to imagine. I'm sure that the cave sound doesn't change. People come and go. Cave is kind of the same. So I think it's a fascinating sound right there, and I like that part of the cave. I really like how I think he would have sounded by saying that old Negro spiritual.
This idea of reaching back through time, through resonance, is powerful, and perhaps is amplified by the darkness and the many shifting shapes and size of formations between the rooms. The path becomes a shared space, the map a score. We came to this space, bringing along with it Jerry's voice, with permission. This led to study 3, and I will let Adam describe the process.
He sent his voice out into the cave in speech and in song, and that voice reverberated and resounded with the voices that came before him, which included his fathers and his fathers before him and his fathers before him and his fathers before him. When he came, we transduced Jerry's voice into a drum in the cave. And that voice again filled the space with those reverberations. Creating entanglements between the cave, his voice, the transducer, and the drum. I was a part of that system. Helping to control and filter those resonances. Like that long heritage, Jerry and his father and his father and his father, I was a guide to those sounds in that system. And now I transduce that experience through memory to you. And through the drum. Have you got religion?
B, a musician. There are numerous cave songs and stories of singing in the cave, and sometimes hearing voices. There are also many stories of, some real and some of legend, of musicians taking instruments into the caves. Orpheus did take his lyra as well as his voice into the underworld, after all. When I first met Rick Toomey, cave research management specialist and research coordinator at Mammoth Cave, to discuss the possibilities of this project in 2013, he immediately introduced me to Janet Bass Smith, pictured above. I learned she had conducted a lot of research on the cave and that she was a pianist. This simple statement, however, is an understatement. Janet Bass Smith received her DMA from UMKC, and I got a sense as to how hardcore she was when she mentioned, "Oh, I did my doctoral research on Persichetti." When we first met, she told me about a concert she organized and performed in which she brought a piano, electronic I believe, into the cave and performed with a cellist. This would become known as the Max Kemper concert, and she performed alongside Kemper's descendant. The connection here is important, as Max Kemper and Ed Bishop, descendant of Stephen Bishop, made an iconic map of Mammoth Cave. We can see simultaneity and layers here. We see paths, water, and chambers. I'd been thinking a lot about Janet recently, not only because I have benefited so much from her research, her generosity, and her enthusiasm. It's because when I was last in the archive at Mammoth Cave, I spent time with all the cave songs she had collected, meticulously organized. And I also could hear her voice when I read her words that described the acoustic features of the space. I knew her so briefly, really. She passed away in December 2020 at the age of 84. And I still always think of her. Reading her notes, it feels like a musician reaching out for other musicians to say, "Hey, there was music here." And why? Why do we keep bringing instruments into spaces? Dark spaces, wet, muddy, sloppy spaces even. Well, we don't have good answers for that ourselves, but we certainly do it. And I would argue the instruments come out different, and so do we. And so we bring her voice into another instrument, the harmonium, which has maneuvered through many tiny spaces in the cave, of which Keith Kirchhoff can tell you a lot. And so I will step aside so that he may do so.
Layers of memory and shared experience across generations. In this piece, you're going to hear a series of recordings. You will hear the recorded interview of Dr. Smith with Dr. Matthusen. You'll hear it layered upon itself, played back in the cave, recursed over time, transforming, and here played back in reverse, starting in mystery and memory, gradually becoming clearer. You'll hear a recording of myself exploring the cave for the first time, playing this harmonium, and you will hear a recording of myself several years later, playing the same harmonium with the recording of myself playing this harmonium with the recording of Dr. Smith. And of course, you will hear this harmonium in this space, bringing that shared experience to you.
C, a speech. As it is often told, a famous speech, or really a soliloquy, was delivered in a particularly large and spectacular area of Mammoth Cave. Yes, that soliloquy. To be or not to be, delivered by Edwin Booth in an area that was subsequently referred to as Booth Amphitheater. Close by this location is the Methodist Church, named so because Reverend George Slaughter Gatewood gave sermons from Pulpit Rock inside it in the 1830s. Black char on parts of the rock reveal not only the traces of where he stood, but also the lanterns he took from his parishioners to line his speaking area, illuminating the preacher and leaving his audience literally captive. What does one imagine when they encounter such a space? A stage? A pulpit? A place of recuperation? A site of shelter? A site of dread? And we'll share. We're talking about all this like heavy things, so there's some nourishment inside of it. It's vegan and it's gluten-free too. Okay. The underground allows for contradiction. A place where one wants to hide things away from public sight, but also a place to keep things safe. Okay, so why that speech? That famous soliloquy? To be or not to be? In a way, it seems kind of silly because, you know, it's all so much bigger than us, regardless of whether it's the question or not. Robert McFarlane discusses limestone caves, of which Mammoth Cave is one, as being part of, as he says, a geology of burial. In part because it is so common globally, in part because its erosive tendencies create so many natural crypts into which bodies may be laid, and in part because limestone is itself, geologically speaking, a cemetery. Limestone is usually formed of the compressed bodies of marine organisms that died in waters of ancient seas and then settled in their trillions on those seabeds. In this way, limestone can be seen as merely one phase in a dynamic earth cycle whereby mineral becomes animal, becomes rock, rock that will in time, in deep time, eventually supply the calcium carbonate out of which new organisms will build their bodies, thereby re-nourishing the same cycle into being again. We play with cycles. We expand and we contract them. Here we take that soliloquy and that space and feed it into itself. In 2016, I recorded actor Molly Shaken delivering that speech from Booth Amphitheater. Sam Wells uses that recording to excite his trumpet, feeding it in, and created a larger feedback loop. I created a larger feedback loop down below. So open up the network and listen to what happens.
Like our recycling of the sound over and over again into the cave, revealed resonances not initially apparent or audible to us. Our many returns to the cave revealed new and evolving perspectives on ourselves, each other, and our relationship to time and sound.
D, a song. That moment of wishing to hear vocals, it's about to come. But first, let's engage with a myth. Legend has it that Jenny Lind, famed soprano and Swedish nightingale, sang in Mammoth Cave when she visited it. However, Janet Bass Smith reasons that this story was false. So why was it told and retold? Jennifer Lynn Stover provides an excellent discussion of the context of Lynn's fandom in performing the sonic color line in the antebellum North, The Swedish Nightingale and the Black Swan, from the sonic color line, Race and the Cultural Politics of Listening. Importantly, she looks at the reception and racialization and gendering of how Lind was presented during her 1851 tour, and how that contrasted greatly with the reception of the star of her American contemporary, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield. As Stover discusses, in contrast with Lind, and despite excellent historical recovery by Black scholars in the late 1960s, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, the Natchez-born Philadelphia-raised former slave who dared sing Lind's repertoire in white concert halls, remains largely a footnote. Stover's arguments are compelling and useful in terms of understanding the greater cultural context of both of these extraordinary talents, and in particular how race and gender intrude on our listening. So, in the dark, let's dream. Let's play with what we conjure in our head when we think of a powerful voice singing in the cave. Let's imagine Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield visiting the cave, and that the fame of her voice would be echoed through its many caverns. Let's simply sing her name and hear it echo across the Echo River. E. An echo. I often refer to the work of Brandon LaBelle when I wish to engage with the concept of the echo. I find his concept of the echo and its potentials to explode the vectors of time especially engaging, especially in Mammoth Cave. Sound is powerful in its unruliness, in its abilities to cut across time and to leak into space. I speak now of the allure of the echo, and perhaps that's just me, but I don't think so, because I think Stephen Bishop was onto something when, thinking of this underwater body as Echo River and naming it so. Speaking from my own interests, hearing the word Echo River absolutely makes me want to seek that place out, to listen, to be curious. And the echoes change because there is water. As the water level changes, the way the sound ricochets across it shifts as well. And so we are reminded of the dynamic interplay of cycles, geological, hydrological, human, and non-human. The echo is unstable, and so we keep returning to it. We play with it, its personality, its dynamism. I'm reminded of the online impulse response library, aptly titled Echo Thief. From this, you can find geolocated impulse responses that will allow one to convolve reverb with recorded sound and make recorded sound as if they are there. But what is the there? And why this concept of thievery? I've resisted utilizing impulse responses from Mammoth Cave in this project, even though I have recorded them there often. Part of it is my belief that the echo can encompass so much more. The damp air chill, the darkness, the sand under our feet, and our laughter and delight in being in such a space together. And also being led there, in our case, by ranger, music enthusiast, and secret hambone extraordinaire, Bryce Leach. But that leading reaches far back to the person who discovered it, Stephen Bishop, the people he led, and the people who led after that, guide after guide, researcher after researcher, worker after worker, tourist after tourist, friend after friend. If we can conceive of a map acting like a score, perhaps simply walking or navigating together can be a composition, a sounding, or a performance. It is at least something we are agreeing to do together. 2. The tape. So, what are we making here? And what are the artifacts of the process? Keeping things unfixed, flexible, we are able to stretch out in the fallibility of our media, the fallibility of our bodies, the fallibility of our ideas, the fallibility of our assumptions, the fallibility of our so-called understanding, to find new stories, new ways of relating. F. A tie, or perhaps a diversion. One story I vividly recall encountering during my undergraduate years was Michael Nyman's discussion of Nam June Paik's performance of In Homage to John Cage. As he states, Paik it was who would move through the intermission crowd in the lobby of a theater, cutting men's neckties off with scissors, slicing coats down the back with a razor blade, and squirting shaving cream on top of their heads. On one occasion, he did this to the father figure himself, John Cage. The piece is called In Homage to John Cage. The sort of thing has led Cage to wonder whether his influence on the young was altogether a good one, comments Calvin Tompkins primely. I was surprised to learn more of the backstory of this performance from my colleague at Wesleyan, Ron Cuivela. The setting was Mary Bauermeister's studio in Cologne, at which Cage and Tudor would have been performing together in their tuxedos. Pike's intention had been to cut the tails off the end of Cage and Tudor's jackets. However, upon learning that they were impoverished, he changed tack immediately and cut off the end of their ties. Artistic intentions veer when they encounter the reality of the people with whom they engage. G, a stretch. I mentioned that the work I'd be discussing here today are large projects whose bounds are shifting and amorphous. That is very true of the project Drift Loop, spearheaded by the Metropolis Ensemble with founder and artistic director Andrew Sear, the Singularity Saxophone Quartet, poet and media scholar Tang Kwei Hu, and visual artist Olivia Valentine. Andrew from Metropolis and Brian McNamara and Cole Bryant of Singularity will be here next week for one of the first public presentations of this work, for which we hope to invite you and that you may also be willing to participate. All are welcome. The original prompt of this came from Singularity, to engage with William Basinski's famous disintegration loops, which, apart from its beauty and repetition, acquired extra musical significance given that the tape loops gradually decayed over the course of several hours while the ruins of the World Trade Center smoldered outside Basinski's studio. After all these years, I still find this piece moving and soothing in its repetition, an acknowledgement that media, in its decay, engenders its own beauty and poiesis. Under Andrew's encouragement, the project has been expanded into a series of reconfigurable parts, which may exist both online and in person, be open instrumentation, involve community-supported scores, and at its maximum length, can be numerous and simultaneous physical spaces and last 24 hours. At its core, it takes the framework of Basinski's original loops as a starting point and then stretches them. A series of loops and different processes are extended over a full day, presently resulting in 40 hours of recorded audio by Singularity and 3 24-hour fixed media loops that play online continuously. This will be reconfigured so that others may jump in on April 20th in the CFA here at University at Buffalo. I will spare the technical derivation and implementation of this for now in hopes that it will entice people to become involved on the 20th. What I do wish to stress is that it is meant to be playable by either listening or, if one wishes, by reading a score. People can interpolate and move around. By stretching, moving, and playing with the things that are not, in a sense, scalable, new possibilities emerge, and hopefully, new interactions. H, accompany, or accompany. Part of what is fun about talking about such big projects is that their unruliness allows for many doors for participation. As I said, they have many hands on them, many partners, many ways of thinking and sounding. In thinking of this, I'm excited to be part of these projects and to share them with you, and to acknowledge that they start from a point of sharing. In his essay, Triangulation, Rob Giampietro draws on the poetry of Dan Chiasson in particular his poem Vital Signs. This has always stayed with me, and I think of it often on these projects, and so I wish to follow a path laid from by a friend and quote it here as well. Moving as a mind moves across a math problem, or an eye across a lover's body, or a dragonfly across the sky, or history through wars and bodies, or a film from frame to frame, or the moods, strangers to each other, or a ferry across a lake all day. Move with me now, for I need company. Being in each other's company, like the echo, can also reach across the time, involving the living, ghosts, and non-human. And so for this, I return to the idea of entanglement and its relation to company. And so I turn to Donna Haraway. As she says, grief is a path to understanding entangled shared living and dying. Human beings must grieve with, because we are and in of this fabric of undoing. Without sustained remembrance, we cannot learn to live with ghosts and so cannot think. Like the crows and with the crows, living and dead, we are at stake in each other's company. 3, the spark. And a thanking. So we began with thanking, so to complete our ternary form here, we end with a thanking. And I wonder how far back can a thanking go? Because my experience of gratitude often feels unbounded, nonlinear. So many of the techniques we used in Mammoth Cave and in a lot of projects discussed here have their indebtedness to people who came before us. The techniques of drift loop, of course, draw from not only Basinski, but so many so-called minimalist techniques, as well as influences from Ludoslavsky, Pauline Oliveros, and Elliot Sharp, among many others. And of course, the techniques employed in Mammoth Cave draw from recursive recording techniques by Alvin Lucier, who was influenced by technical demonstrations by Bose, and well famously by engineer Edmund Dewan. And like I said, the projects today, and the one coming up next week, all have many hands upon them. Those people and places who places have been the amazing people at Mammoth Cave, the composers, performers, and improvisers who have all been a part of today, the University at Buffalo Music Department, many from my own department at Wesleyan, and also friends, colleagues, and collaborators along the way. It was earlier this fall semester when I felt a renewed grief at Alvin's passing, since it was my first time teaching the course he started, Intro to Experimental Music, Music 109, without him present. I thought a lot about the vulnerability of teaching and the vulnerability of learning. I feel Alvin had a good sense of this. For that, he stayed generous during the 10 years we overlapped during his retirement. He always came into 109, even after retiring. He invited students over to his house for fish fries. He went to concerts. In other words, he was present. And that is to say, he loved it. He loved it. And that fans out as its own entanglement. And so I wish to end with a piece introduced to me by Alvin, which was by Laura Kakauka, though he can't remember her name in the fragment that I'm going to play from you. Significantly, the name of the piece was also the name of the hangout where Laura Kakauka and her partner, Gordon Monahan, spent time in Berlin in the mid-90s and developed a lot of work. With the help of Matt Wellens and Ron Kuivala and several internet searches, I was able to learn a way to test out the ideas of this piece. The context of this conversation was that I showed up at Alvin's doorstep in 2016, having already taught 109 for about 5 years and with some burning questions. So I will let Alvin have the last word and simply say thank you for listening as we move into our 10th and final section. J, a pickle.
I always wanted to do, remember Monahan, what's his first name? Monahan. Gordon Monahan's partner, what was her name? did a piece called The Glowing Pickle. I was always afraid she had this dill pickle. She'd take, usually in Europe, 200, she'd take the power, put one nail in one side of the pickle, and the power, the 220 volts go through the pickle, start. I'm silly, it would start, it would glow. I always wanted to do that, but I was afraid if you turn to 20 volts, you could kill it. Well, students, you want to hit them with the weirdest, well, interest. I don't mean just for the sake of showing, but some weird ideas because, who knows, the idea of the glowing, you could, people write to me and I said, I took your class in I'm now a video artist in Santa Monica. I remember these pieces more than musicians. Who knows? You could get a nice idea